Well, a great welcome to all of you. This is Fadi, and with me a very special guest that has been here on this show a couple of times already. But today, we would like to feature our dear brother Samuel Green as part of our new series called Books and Authors. And today we're going to talk about one of his books. And we would like for him, of course, when we start the show, to walk us through certain chapters. And at the same time, we want to highlight this book and its importance in your ministries when it comes to reaching Muslims. Obviously, our brother here is no stranger to Islam. He just finished actually doing 3 debates about Islam or comparison between Islam and Christianity in terms of certain topics. I'll let him also discuss that briefly at the beginning of the show. I want to welcome all of you who are joining us right now. And I want to welcome our moderators. We have an Aussie actually with us, and we also have a Welsh. So it can get tougher than this when it comes to moderators. So we want to welcome all of you, of course, for being here. And we thank you for taking the time to join us. I hope that you will find this particular show enjoyable. Our brother have a wealth of information and resources that I would like also for him to highlight. With that in mind, brother, thank you so much for agreeing to be on our show, given that you have just finished 3 debates. I'm sure you're exhausted. You need some time to relax, but we're thankful for your heart to serve the Lord.
Thank you, Fadi. It's a pleasure to be on your program today, and hello to everyone. And I'm fine. The debate's finished just before Easter, so I've had the weekend to recover, and I'm feeling great, and I'm keen to be on your program.
Thank you so much. So before we start talking about your book, which is a really interesting book about where to start with Islam, tell us a little bit about these 3 debates that you were engaged in.
Yeah, so I was challenged to debate the topic of slavery, and you'll be able to see these debates on my Engaging with Islam website. And I didn't particularly want to do the topic of slavery, but we did the topic of slavery in Christianity and slavery in Islam. And then I did the topic for a university of salvation in Christianity and Islam. So how are we saved? And we looked at those 2 areas. We looked at those 3 areas. And it was a great time. It was hard work. The ones on slavery were hard work. The ones on salvation, I'd done a lot of work on already, and we'll probably be talking about that in my book. I'm keen to be able to engage with the Muslim community and to help them think through these issues, because many of them have their own thoughts that they've been taught from their leaders, and most of the time what they've been taught is simply not true. And so I look forward to the debates where I can go in, speak to a Muslim audience, and help them work through what the truth is, and present the Christian truth. And we've got the truth so it can be defended. So that's what I do.
Amen. Amen. Once again, if you're joining us, this is our special live stream called Books and Authors. And with us here, a dear brother in the Lord, a debater, an author. His name is Samuel Green. I've had him here on my show twice already. He really covered interesting topics. One of them has to do with tabernacle, for instance, and how you can use that to prove that Islam is false. That was a very interesting topic, and hopefully we'll have him again to talk about other topics similar to this. I want to welcome those of you who are joining us, our moderators. We have LJ, we have Mariana, we have Gedalia, and we have, you're attracting Aussies, man. We have Sister Diana Summers also. The MST team is here already. And we are so blessed, of course, to have you here. So, brother, the book that we want to feature is called Where to Start with Islam. And I thought the title in and of itself is interesting. Tell us a little bit more about the title.
Well, I'll hold it up here so people can see it.
Yes, and I'm going to put the information like you suggested in the description box, but tell people also where they can find it as well.
Yes, well, you can get it from Amazon, or Matthias Media is the publisher, and they distribute in the US and in Australia and in the UK. And so it's matthiasmedia.com. From there, you'd be directed to any of the websites for your local country. But yes, I'll send you the URLs, and you can put that in the description box, and they can get the direct link from there. But Amazon or any bookshop any Christian bookshop can get it in for you. Yeah. Wonderful. Now you're asking about the title.
Yeah, the title. What brought? I mean, it's an interesting title, really. I mean, where to start with Islam? I mean, was it intended, to be a positive way to draw people to engage with Islam, or are you suggesting that there is usually a struggle to find the right approach?
Yeah, I am. So what I'm suggesting in the book, or what I'm saying in the book, is that when it comes to Islam, it's really helpful to start in the right place. And that if you don't start in the right place, you may find yourself in a situation where the Muslim knows where to start in the right place for you and is happy to guide you around. And so we want to make sure that we start in the right place as Christians, so that we make progress in our ministry. And my contention is that very often we don't start in the right place for reasons which I'll go into, I think, probably a bit later on. But that's the idea. The title of the book, Where to Start with Islam, is about putting forward why we need to start in certain places and why we don't really want to start in other places. So that's the thesis of the book.
Great. So tell us, what are the safest places to get started, actually, with this topic?
Well, I guess what I want to say is, I want to look at various topics, and so each chapter of the book looks at various topics, and I look at how, from my own experience, I started in certain places, but they weren't the most helpful place to start. And then just through trial and error and being part of the Answering Islam team and watching debates and just being part of the debating community and apologetics community, you start to work out what's a better place to start. And so that's what I've tried to do with these 10 different chapters, to look at different topics, common places that Christians often start, and then to suggest, actually, this is a better place to start. So I guess in order to answer your question, I've sort of got to look at one of those topics in particular, which we could do. I could start with chapter 2, and if you want me to look at that one, and that's learning about Islam.
Yeah, I'm looking at the table of content, but I want you to have the freedom really to walk us through. So the chapter 2, for instance, says learning about Islam. Yeah.
So I think when it comes to learning about Islam, one of the things we can do is you can go and get a book on world religions, and they're often very good, and they'll tell you about the 5 pillars of Islam, or the basic beliefs of Islam, or something like that. And so you get all these details about Islam. And so that's how I started to learn about Islam as well. And I thought, right, I know this material about Islam, therefore now I'm ready to go and talk to a Muslim. And then I'd talk to a Muslim, and I'd find out that the Muslim knew all these things about Christianity, and they never talked to me about the five pillars of Islam. They didn't talk about the basic beliefs. They just wanted to talk about Christianity. And I went, this book on world religion sort of didn't really help me. I learned all this stuff about Islam, but the Muslims seemed to be coming from a different place. And so in this chapter, I begin by saying, we often learn about Islam by learning the 5 pillars, the basic beliefs. But I want to suggest there's a different place to start to learn, and that is by understanding our place on the historical timeline. Often we talk about history being important, but I want to say it's not so much history when it comes to Islam that's important. What's important is where you sit on the historical timeline. And what I mean by that is Islam comes roughly 600 years after Christianity, depending upon where you want to start, say 500 to 600 years. Now, that has a significant effect on how we learn about each other. Because when you read the Bible, Islam is still 500 years in the future. So when you read the Bible, you never read about Islam. You don't read about the apostles in the book of Acts evangelizing Muslims. And so as Christians, you can actually be a mature Christian who knows their faith really well and know nothing about Islam. That's quite possible. And there are plenty of Christians in the world who are mature Christians. They know nothing about Islam because it's not in the Bible. It's completely optional for us to learn about it. But because of Islam's position on the historical timeline, that is, they come roughly 500 to 600 years after Christianity, the situation is the exact opposite. And so I go through this in the chapter in the Quran, in the chapter in my book. The Quran talks about the death of Jesus and says Jesus only appeared to die. He only appeared to die. It talks about the Trinity and says, say not three, and it refutes the Trinity. It talks about the incarnation. It says, Jesus is not God in various places. It talks about the fatherhood of God and says, God is not the father of anyone. We can only come to God as slaves. And it rejects the idea of salvation by grace because God has not done anything for you. Now, just think about that. This is just the Quran itself. I'm not talking about the Hadith or Islamic traditions or anything else. There's the death of Jesus. So Muslims have a doctrine of the death of Jesus. They're taught about the Trinity. They're taught about the incarnation. They're taught about the fatherhood and the Son of God, and they reject salvation by grace. Now, they are all our major, unique doctrines as Christians. They are the doctrines that make us Christian, that make us different to everyone else. And the Quran prepares Muslims for all those doctrines of the gospel. Now, what I suggest in my book is that if you want to learn about Islam and you're just starting, the place to learn is not about the 5 pillars, which they're not going to talk to you about. The place to learn is, what does Islam teach about Christianity? That's the place to start. I'm not saying don't learn about other things at other times, but if I've got a group of Christians that I'm training and they may not have the time to learn everything about Islam the way I have, what is the one thing I want them to know about Islam? Well, I want them to know what Islam teaches about Christianity and the preparation that the Quran gives Muslims to talk to Christians. And for me, that is the number one cultural difference that Christians need to know about.
Exactly.
It's not do you take your shoes off? It's not don't eat ham. All of those cultural things, I want to say, are secondary. They're just minor compared to the fact that Islam prepares Muslims quite thoroughly to talk to Christians. So that's sort of what I do in each chapter. I look at what we commonly learn about how to do something, and I say, actually, I think this is where you need to start.
You bet. And if I may comment here, we have one of our friends here is named Jeremy Wong, and he's saying the Trinity, the Islamic Trinity, is a pagan doctrine. We're not debating that, Jeremy. And I think what Samuel is saying is you have to find places where you can have a meaningful conversation. I mean, we understand that the Quran is not articulating our Trinity. It'll be surprising, really, if I articulated the Trinity and they still reject it. But we need to find areas that they feel safe, not intimidated by it, and at the same time, it opens the door for us to begin to engage them. So, be patient with us, Jeremy. I think you are going to appreciate what Samuel is going to say. So for instance, if we go to, if you don't mind me, jump into chapter 4.
I'll just finish something off there.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
No, I'll just finish because you see, the door swings both ways. The door swings both ways. The Quran prepares Muslims for Christianity, and so that means that when you meet a Muslim, they may be more prepared to talk to you about Christianity than you are to talk to them about Islam. That may be the case, but what it also means is that Muslims are meant to learn about Christianity. Right? If you're a Muslim reading the Quran, you know that Christianity is there and you're meant to be learning certain things about it. And so this actually gives you a great opportunity to share the gospel with a Muslim, because you can ask them, what does Islam teach about Christianity? And they will think you're talking to them about Islam, when in actual fact, from your perspective, you're talking about Christianity. And so the fact that Islam teaches Muslims about Christianity, it teaches them wrongly. So I agree with Jeremy, it teaches them wrongly, but it still teaches them that they're meant to know about Christianity. And this actually gives you a great opportunity. And so each of my chapters, it shows you how to turn this situation into an evangelistic opportunity. And so one of the questions I always say to Muslims is, what have you heard about Christianity? And I just get going from there with taxi drivers, whoever, and I find out where they're coming from. And it's a really helpful introduction because they're actually meant to know about it.
Yeah, that's great, brother. We'll revisit chapter 3 later, but I want to start with chapter 4, for instance. Is Jesus God? So how do you deal with that?
Yes. Well, you see, when I first became a Christian, when I first started to meet Muslims, I would very quickly find out that they already had a doctrine of Jesus. They already had an understanding of Jesus, and that he wasn't God come to save us. And so I would get verses in the New Testament and show them, where Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am, or I am the Father of one, or Thomas saying, my Lord and my God. In the beginning was the Word was with God. There are all these verses where, we see these descriptions of Jesus in his full divinity. But what I found was that I didn't make much progress, and they would just, very often dismiss the Bible, dismiss these quotes or whatever. And so I started to think about how do I show them that Jesus is God? What do I do? And so I used to start at the New Testament, and then I realized I needed to look at other points. And now in the book, what I do is I take you through these other points. And did you want me to go through some of those points now?
Oh, yeah, please, if you could.
Absolutely. Okay. So, the first point is that because God is the creator, it means that he connects with creation. And this is something we don't often think about. But the doctrine of creation is a very deep, beautiful doctrine. And most of our other doctrines come out of the doctrine of creation. So the doctrine of creation says that God brought everything into being, and he did it by his word. And so there's a connection between God and creation. If there's no connection, then God didn't do it. And so the creator God brings into being creation by his word. Now, that's actually quite different to other views of God. So if you look at, say, the Greek philosophical views of God, their idea was that God couldn't even touch creation. And so God, in fact, wasn't the creator. He made something else, and that other thing made creation because God cannot touch it. Now, very often the Muslims will have this Greek idea of God. They'll have the idea that God is so separate, so different, that he can't become a man. He couldn't do that because he's transcendent. He's completely transcendent. Now, this actually denies the doctrine of creation, because the doctrine of creation says God created all things. He didn't make something else to make it. He himself made it. God sustains all things. Think about that. God is sustaining all things. That is, there is some connection between God and his creation in which he is sustaining its existence. Now, I'm not going to go through all these other examples, the examples of revelation and God being all present, but the doctrine of God being creator means that God connects with his creation all the time. Whenever he interacts with his creation, there is some connection between the creator, transcendent God, and his creation. And so what we see is that the incarnation is a new and beautiful expression of this doctrine of creation, that the creator God who connects with his creation is now connecting with it and taking to himself a human nature. He's doing what the creator God does. He always connects with his creation. And so it's actually quite important to realize that. And so I bring this up with Muslims, where I just say, if you believe that God is the creator, you believe he connects with his creation. It's interesting that in the early centuries of Christianity, the people who denied that Jesus was God or that he was physical were the people who also denied that God was the creator. Okay, so if you look at Arius, who's the famous man that we had the theological discussions with, he was a Neoplatonist, and he actually said God wasn't the creator. Okay, because God can't touch creation. And so you can see it was his doctrine of creation that led him to deny that God could take to himself a human nature and be with us. So we need to talk about the doctrine of creation. Look, I've just tried to give a bit of a summary there. I go through it in a lot more detail in my book. The next point would be that the infinite God always accommodates himself to a finite creation. So I've had Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses say to me, you know, how can a God who's infinite, he's infinite in power, infinite in glory, infinite in all these ways, he's the infinite God, how could he be in a finite man? How can an infinite God be in a finite man? Now, there's sort of two answers to this, but one of them is that the infinite God, every single time he interacts with his creation in any way, it's always in a finite way. So when he creates, it's a finite creation, yet it still reveals the glory of the infinite God. When the infinite God speaks to us and gives us his word, the word that we receive is finite. There's a certain number of words. His word is finite that we receive. Yet that finite word of God is a true expression of the infinite God. And so what we see is, again, this is just the doctrine of creation, that every single time the infinite God interacts with his finite creation, it's in a finite way. God accommodates himself to his creation, yet as he accommodates himself, it's still a true expression of who the infinite God is. And so this is what we have in Jesus. We have the infinite God accommodating himself to us through the person of the divine Son, through the Lord Jesus Christ, taking to himself a human nature. God, the infinite God, is accommodating himself to us. But what I want to show with these last 2 points about God connecting with creation and God accommodating himself to creation is that these are just the general doctrines of creation. These are just the doctrines we believe already outside of the incarnation, and the incarnation is actually built upon them. Now, did you want to make any discussion on any point there before I move on to the next?
You're actually bringing in a lot of deep topics that I like for us to do shows on those alone. But no, I want you to keep just talking, but keep it to a teaser level, because I want people to get your book.
Sure.
So that they can. And there's a lot of compliments, by the way, about what you're saying. A lot of people are really appreciating the level that you're sharing with us right now. So thank you.
Thank you. And look, and you've just reminded me of what I've wanted to say, and that is, you see, to understand the incarnation and explain it to Muslims, we actually need to know our own doctrine better. And this is one of the contentions I want to have, that very often Christians will look around and say, what's the illustration I need for the incarnation that will make sense to a Muslim? And I don't want to say that I'm against illustrations. I think there's a place for them, but I want to say they are secondary or third or even fourth. You know, they're just far away. What you actually need to know is the doctrine of creation, the doctrine of God's accommodation. You know, we actually need to know our own doctrine deeply and the foundations of the incarnation, which again is what I go through in the book. I go through all the foundations, and I take Muslims through these. I say to them, do you believe God's the creator? And I say, well, that means he connects with creation. Well, what's your problem with God connecting with creation in Jesus? Do you believe God accommodates himself to creation? Well, that's what we have here. And I take Muslims through these, and they actually, you know, I've debated this a few times. They never have any problem with this because they actually agree with all these foundations. The last one I'll just do quickly, there's two I'll just do quickly. One is that God's plan is to come and dwell with his people. Now, this builds upon the temple seminar that I gave the last time I was on your program. But God's plan has always been to come and dwell with his people. So he dwelt with Adam in the garden. He dwelt with Israel in the tabernacle. His plan in the prophets is that he will come and bring a glorious resurrection temple, and he will dwell with his people forever. And so you need to speak to your Muslim friend and say, you know, does God, what is God's plan? Is his plan to come and dwell with us? Because when you realize that that's his plan, then of course the incarnation is not strange. It's not novel. You know, the incarnation is God coming to dwell with us. That's always been his plan. So there's sort of the three things about God that I want to talk to Muslims about, because often when we talk to them, and I've got a little diagram in the book where, I say often when Christians and Muslims talk, we think that we agree about God and we agree about humanity and we agree about creation. There's all these things we agree. We just differ when it comes to Jesus. Well, I want to say, no, we actually differ about God. We differ about what it means to be human, and we differ about creation. And so we need to talk about God, humanity, and creation first. And as you talk through those foundations, you as a Christian will see how reasonable the incarnation is, and the Muslim gets the ground that they need. The last quick point I'll say is the doctrine of the image of God. See, what does the doctrine of the image of God say? It says that God has made humanity to represent him in this world. We are meant to represent the rule of God, and we are meant to display his character and glory. That's what it means to be a human, right? A human is meant to represent the rule of God. This is Genesis 1:26. We represent the rule of God in this world, and we're meant to display his character and glory in this world, which is be holy as I am holy, godliness. And so, you need to say with your Muslim friend, what does it mean to be human? Because we don't even agree with them as to what it means to be human. So if we're not clear with them as to what God means and what it means for God to be God, that is, he connects with creation, he accommodates himself to creation, his plan is to come and dwell with his creation. If we haven't got that clear, and we're not clear with them as to what it means to be human, because they don't really have the doctrine of the image of God in the way we do. If we don't agree about God and we don't agree about humanity, do you think we're going to agree about Jesus being God? Right? There's no way. There's no way. We've got to talk about who God is, who humanity is, because when God comes to us as a man, he's not coming in some random form. It's not some random form. He's actually coming to us in a form that he made with the express purpose of representing his rule and displaying his glory in this world. And so you can see how once you go through those foundations, I won't go through it much more now, but once you go through those foundations, it's now a different playing field. Now all of a sudden you've got the grounds to explain, the logic behind every aspect of the incarnation. My book also goes through the Old Testament and the preparation it gives us, and with each of these chapters, I want to say there's a booklet that you can download, an evangelistic booklet. So you read the chapter, and that's so many pages. There's a summary at the end of each chapter, so that if you haven't read it for a couple of years, you can go back and just read the summary at the end, not have to read the whole chapter again. And then if you go to the website, there's a booklet for that chapter, which is an evangelistic booklet that you can print off and give to your Muslim friend and read with them.
So, that's wonderful. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Everybody, again, please, I encourage you to get the book. The price is extremely reasonable. You can get it obviously from Amazon, but I also encourage you, can they get it from your own website, Engaging with Islam?
Yes, there are links there. So if you're in the US, there's a US distributor. If you're in the UK, there's a UK distributor. It depends what country you're in. But if you go to engagingwithislam.org and just scroll down a bit, you'll see the book with all the links.
Wonderful. And we will continue right now. Again, I want to welcome everyone who's joining us. Thank you so much. This has been an international attraction today. And Sister Diana, thank you for clarifying that you are a Brit, actually. So here's what's going on with us here today, Samuel. So we have an Aussie, we have a Welsh, we have a Brit, and we have a Canadian. They all have one thing in common, the Queen. We're the US people are the rebel. So all that to say is let's move on now to the next chapter. The Trinity, which is a very complex, even for Christians, with all due respect. That's probably one of the most complex doctrines, and I agree with you. We need to understand our own faith first before we begin to interact with others about it, or even attack what they do or don't believe about it.
Yes. Yeah, look, when it comes to the Trinity, how I used to start was with illustrations. I would show verses to Muslims, and they would generally be dismissive over those verses. I probably wasn't explaining the Bible as clearly as I should have at those earlier times. But then I would try to have an illustration as well to say how, 3 can be 1 and 1 can be 3. Now, I guess for me, it was just from debating on this subject several times and then reading Islamic books. And so I've got an Islamic doctrine book here, that I then started to realize one thing, and I think this is so important, and this is the first point I bring up in my book, and that is that it's not just Christians who have a Trinitarian question, but every single philosophy and religion in the world has a question like the Trinity, including Islam. So I'll just give you a brief example, just a couple of brief examples. In Hinduism, all of the diversity around you, all the diversity you see around you, our Fadi is a different person to me, and the trees are different to me. All that diversity is an illusion. It's an illusion because all is one. So you see what Hinduism's trying to do? It's trying to connect. How do we have absolute oneness and all the diversity? How do you answer that? How do they connect? It has no answer. It's apart from saying that everything you see around you is an illusion and it's actually just one. Buddhism is the same. Buddhism says that everything around you, all the diversity and distinctions around you, are actually a distraction. They're a distraction. And what you need to do is to follow the right path. And then as you follow the right path, one day you'll stop reincarnating and you'll be away from all this distraction of distinction and diversity, and you'll enter into the oneness. You see, it's exactly the same question. How do you balance oneness, the oneness of the consciousness, with all the diversity that we see around you? And so in Buddhism and in Hinduism, life is an escape from diversity, trying to get to oneness. That is, Hinduism and Buddhism cannot hold together the one and the many. They can't hold it together. Now, that's actually the Trinitarian question. How do you hold the one and the three? It's exactly the same. It's actually the same question when it comes to cosmology. Cosmologists are fairly certain that the universe began with a singularity, with an absolute oneness, singularity. But what they're measuring now in cosmology, because I did physics at university, with all of our mathematics and our cosmology that we do, we've got these formulas for all the diversity in the universe. And so if you look at this, they try to take their mathematics back to point zero, back to the singularity, but they can't do it. And so this is just one of the amazing things, that they know there's a singularity, that they know there's oneness. This is modern physics. They know there's oneness. They know there's all this diversity, but they can't bring it together. Now, this is the first thing you need to know as a Christian, that everyone has a question like the Trinity. And if you go to start talking to a Muslim and you think you're the only one who has to answer oneness and distinction, then you're going to lose, right? When you realize that everyone is trying to answer this question and they can't, all of a sudden the whole ground changes. Everything's different. And so I was at an Australian university, and we were having an open seminar time on the Trinity, and there were some Muslims who were at that campus who were very forceful, confident, aggressive Muslims who love to come to the meetings and ask all the questions. You know the type of Muslims that I'm talking about. And so they came to this meeting, and I read to them from this Islamic book. And in this Islamic book, this man gets up and he says, one of the problems in Islam that we haven't solved is that of the attributes of God and his oneness. And he talks about how in the early centuries of Islam, the Muslims couldn't solve this. And so some were saying that God's attributes are part of his nature. Others were saying that the attributes are separate from the nature. And the reason they're saying this is that Allah has got all these distinct attributes. Each one is distinct and different from the other attributes, yet they want to say Allah is just oneness. So how can all of his attributes all share equally in the oneness and yet still just be one when they're all distinct? They had no answer to that. They had inquisitions over this early in their history. And so I gave the quote where this scholar brings this up, and the scholar in the end just says, we solve this problem by saying, Bila Kaifa. Bila Kaif, I'm not sure exactly the ending, but Bila Kaif, without asking how. Now, I brought this up in this seminar, and from that point on, the Muslims were completely quiet, right? Because they now knew that they had a similar question that I was going to start talking about, and we've actually got an answer, but they have no answer. And see, Muslims, when they come to their understanding of God, their answer is, don't ask. Don't ask. How can God have a spirit that he breathes out? Because the Quran talks about Allah breathing out his spirit, talks about Allah's hands, his eyes, talks about all these things. How can you have him breathing out his spirit and be absolute one, absolute oneness? You don't ask how, right? And so that's the first section in the Trinity section of my book, where I say you've got to understand everyone is trying to answer this question, and Muslims can't answer it. Hindus and Buddhists and cosmologists can't answer it either. We actually have the answer, because we're saying that ultimate reality is both oneness and distinction, and that's why everything else is reflected that way. But my point is that this is my first point. You've got to understand that everyone's trying to answer this question, and Muslims have no answer, and that Islamic theology is based on don't ask how. And so that's my first point there. Look, I could go on with the other points. I may not go on with them because I've taken a fair bit of time there. But you know, it's just getting this shift in thinking. When you go into a debate thinking, I'm the only one who has to answer oneness and distinction, the one nature shared by the three related divine persons, you know, whenever you think that you're the only one with that question, the Muslim will always put the pressure on you. But as soon as you actually ask them the same question and they have no answer, all of a sudden everything is just different. That the pressure's off you, and now you've got a level playing field. And so that's what I do in my book. I help you to look at those types of things. Now, I take you through a whole lot of other stuff on the Trinity, which may or may not look at, but
not a problem. What book you keep referring to, the Islamic book? What is that book?
It's called The Beneficial Message. Hang on, so can you?
Yeah, The Beneficial Message?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. In case people ask about what it is. So just to clarify that. All right. Very good. So let's talk about salvation, for instance, which is another very important topic when it comes to sharing the gospel with Muslims. So how do you address that?
Yeah. So again, when I started writing my chapter in the book on salvation, I thought I knew what Islam believed, because I had read Islamic books on salvation. I had read Christian books on Islam and salvation, and I'd participated in a few debates on this topic, and I had and I had watched most of the other debates that were out there. And the way that Christians taught about Islam and salvation was it's a religion of works. You've got to do the 5 pillars and all these types of things. And Muslims were giving us a similar message. They were saying, you know, you have correct belief, you do what Allah says, you know, you do the 5 pillars, and you hope in His mercy, and so that's what they say. And then when I was debating with Muslims and watching other debates, I noticed that the debates all took a similar pattern. They almost all took a similar pattern, and that is the Christian would get up and give a gospel presentation, and it would be a good gospel presentation. The Muslim would get up and say, Allah has mercy, and then they would spend the rest of their time attacking the Christian position. And what I started to see as I was writing my book was the Muslims were not actually telling us what they believe. That they say Allah has mercy and this type of thing, but they never really gave it content in the same way that Christians give content when it comes to the gospel. And so the Muslim in the debate would typically just say Allah has mercy, And then the Christian would respond and say, how can God be merciful and just? And the Muslim would just say, he just is, and would go back to attacking the gospel. Anyway, so after having 2 debates like that myself, and reading and watching everyone else, one day, by God's grace, as I was writing this chapter, I started to just think about, I don't know, started to bring it together. And it was just the simplest thing that we all know, and that is that the martyr goes straight to paradise. The Islamic martyr goes straight to paradise. And I just started to think about how strange it was that in the books on Islam that Christians had written, none of them that I had read, maybe there are some, but none of them that I had read had spelt out the Islamic view of salvation as martyrs go straight to paradise. Certainly in all the debates that I had watched, when the Muslim gets up to talk about going to paradise, they don't get up and say martyrs have complete assurance of going to paradise. And so what I started to see was that Muslims really don't want to tell you what they believe about how to be saved. It's not really the main message of Islam. It's not something they probably even agree on. And so it's not as important to Islam as it is in Christianity. You know, Muhammad's message when he sends out his followers is not, here is a message on how to be saved. You know, this is what God has done to save you. That's the Christian message. When Muhammad sent out his jihadists, the message was, there's one God, Muhammad is his prophet, and you have 3 choices. It's not a message of salvation. It's a message of confrontation. So Muslims they simply don't tell us what they believe about salvation. And so in my last two or three debates, I've done something quite different here, and that is I've actually shown what the Quran and Hadith teach about salvation, and this changes the whole debate. This changes the whole debate because now the Muslim has content they need to defend. Now, in the book, there's a diagram which I put there. So let me just see if I can quickly find that diagram for you. I think that was just it there. So there's the little diagram. That's the Muslim view of salvation. There's the martyr. The martyr goes straight to paradise. What happens to other Muslims? Well, your other Muslim friend, they will go into the grave. And in the grave, other people can do good works for them. I don't know if you knew that, but Islam has
of course. Yeah, three things that could be done on their behalf.
Yeah, and so Islam actually has a substitution theory.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Did you know that Islam has a substitutionary theory? Other people can do good deeds which will be credited to you in the grave.
That's right.
And other things can happen in the grave, and I'll leave you to read my book there. So there are actually 3 paths of being saved in Islam. There's the martyr. They go straight to paradise. Everyone else goes into the grave. In the grave, you might go, other things might happen for you, and then you might make it into paradise. Hopefully you will. Or what might happen is you'll go to hell, and then you'll be in hell for a while, and then after a while, you'll come out. Now, when you go through that with your Muslim friend, all of a sudden the ground is changed. You know, it's no longer they're just attacking the gospel. Now you have shown them what Islam believes, and they have to defend the Islamic belief, and you can actually have a decent conversation. And so what I do is on my phone, and people can download this from my website, I have that diagram of the 3 paths of salvation in Islam. And when I talk to Muslims, I just show them that diagram. And what I ask them is, I don't ask them, have you done enough good deeds to be saved? I don't think that's a good question to ask Muslims. Rather, I say to them, which path are you on? Which path are you on? And that makes a lot more sense, I have found, to Muslims, because this is how they think. That they know the martyr goes straight to paradise. They know that some people will go to hell. And generally, they're not too sure which path they're on. You know, will I go to hell for a while? What will happen to me in the grave? I don't exactly know. And so that's their area of lack of assurance. It's different to what we might think as Christians. And so, so again, you know, if you go to the website, you can download the the diagram, and so as we understand their doctrine of salvation, it allows us to start in a better place. It allows us to start in a better place, and we could ask them which path they're on, and they will most likely say to you, I don't know. But now you're having a proper conversation with them, and you know where they're coming from, and they have had their belief shown for what it is. And then you say to them, people do try to make many paths to God. It's true, in this world, there are people trying to make their own path to God in different ways. But when God comes to us to save us, there's just one path. And then you talk to them about Jesus. So that's the salvation chapter. It was developing that diagram and seeing the different paths to salvation, and then seeing how to apply that, and it gives Christians great confidence, stops them getting fooled by Muslims, and means that Muslims have to be honest with everyone about what they believe.
Amen. Well, chapter 8 is quite of an explosive chapter. It's almost like walking into a minefield. Who is Muhammad? and that's usually where the conversation ends.
Yes, it can be. And in that chapter, I have tried to be as generous as I can to Islam, right? I try to do this when I engage with Islamic theology and with debates. I always want the Muslim to put forward their best case. I want to engage with what they actually believe. And in chapter 8, what I do is I look at how does the Quran present itself, and what evidence does it give that it is true? So if we're going to let the Quran present itself to us and let the Quran authenticate itself to us, what does it say? And I think there's about 6 or 7 different things that it says there. And, so it first of all says that, actually, I better just grab that chapter because I can't remember. I've got it right here, ready to go. So I call it taking Muhammad on his own terms. Taking Muhammad on his own terms. And so Muhammad actually gives a whole range of reasons as to why you should accept the Quran. And so I'm saying, well, okay, I'll just let him give his own reasons. And so his first reason is that if Muhammad was not a true prophet, then God would strike him dead. And this comes from Surah 69, verse 44. And it says that if he was a false prophet, Allah would cut his aorta, and he would, Allah wouldn't let him be a prophet like this. Now, it's a ridiculous argument. There are plenty of false prophets who go around teaching, and God doesn't strike them dead. So it's not even a valid reason. But this is how the Quran does stuff. It doesn't really give valid reasons. It's also a reason which works against Islam, because if you read the hadith, then when Muhammad was dying, he was saying, my aorta, my vein in my neck, my aorta. So the very thing that the Quran says would be a sign of him being a false prophet is actually what happens to him when he dies. So, that's the first reason. So it's not very good. It's not a good reason the Quran gives, because it's either irrelevant, or if it's true, then it was true of Muhammad, so he is a false prophet. The second reason it gives is that if Muhammad is a true prophet because the Quran is in Arabic. Now, it's just not even a reason. What type of reason is that? It's in Arabic, therefore it must be from God. Well, I mean, what do you do with that? So I take you through these reasons and just categorize them for you. What's the next one? There's no contradictions in the Quran. Well, there's plenty of contradictions in the Quran, and I list them out for you. So that doesn't work as a reason. What was the fourth reason I've got here? Oh, but bring a surah like it. Nobody can make anything like the surah, like this surah. And nobody can make anything like the Quran in whatever way, and it doesn't say what way it is, so it's vague. And then I just show you where in the Quran, the Meccans actually said, oh, well, we can make something like this, but we're not interested, right? So this is Surah 8, verse 31. when our signs, the Quran, are recited to the Meccans, they say, "We have heard, were we to wish, we could say something like this." So, the Quran just gives these reasons which aren't even valid. It says reason 5. It says the Quran confirms the earlier prophets. And one of the things I've done in my book is I've developed this table which shows what the Torah, the books of the prophets, the Psalms, and the Gospel all teach. And I look at the themes in there, and it's one of the tables that I use in my debates, and how the Quran just doesn't have any of the major teachings of the prophets. And so it just doesn't confirm the earlier prophets. What was it? Reason 6. Reason 6, Muhammad's foretold in the Bible. Well, he's just not. And I take you through that. And I think that's all of what I do for looking at Muhammad on his own terms. And then I test Muhammad in terms of the Bible. Jesus said, "You'll know a tree by its fruit." And so I take you through the life of Muhammad and look at his fruit. And we can see that he's definitely not a true prophet by the way he behaves. So, yeah, that's that chapter. Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not at all. All of that is interesting, and I want people really to enjoy reading it by purchasing this book. Again, I encourage everyone to get a copy. Like I said, the cost is very, very, very economical and very reasonable. And again, we are showcasing a book called Where to Start with Islam by authored by our brother here, Samuel Green. You can find a link to purchasing that on his own website, engagingwithislam.org, or you can go to Amazon. Also, we encourage you to support his ministry. He does a lot of debates with Muslims, and he certainly does his debates in a very, very, very amicable way, very respectful way, professional way. So we're not talking about shouting match or anything to that extent, but at the same time, he does share the truth. With that in mind, brother, I want you to close by telling our viewers, maybe some of the best approaches to sharing the gospel with Muslims.
Yeah. This would be in chapter 3 of my book where I go through this. One of the things that Muslims take pride in is that they have been taught that they believe all the prophets. And so for a Muslim, they will say to you, "We believe in Jesus. We believe in Moses. We believe in all the prophets. You can't be a Muslim unless you love all the prophets." And I have found that you need, if we want to introduce the gospel in a way that makes sense to Muslims, then we need to show them that they don't believe all the prophets. Remember how in Acts 17, Paul introduces the gospel in different ways to different groups of people. To Jews in the synagogue, he begins with the Old Testament, tells the story of the Old Testament, brings it to Jesus. When he's on Mars Hill and he's sharing the gospel, and he's talking with the idol worshippers there, he starts with an altar to an unknown God. Paul introduces the gospel in different ways to different groups. And I believe that a helpful way of introducing the gospel to Muslims is by showing them that they don't believe all the prophets. And the way that I do this is by my first Bible study being the table of contents of the Bible. Now, again, I go through this in greater depth in chapter 3, but I will speak with a Muslim and say, "What have you heard about Christianity?" And I'll let them talk and find out what they've heard about Christianity, where they're coming from. And then I'll say to them, "Can I just show you one thing?" And they nearly always say yes. And I say, "Can I show you what books are in the Bible?" And then I take them to the table of contents and I show them the table of contents. And I say, "Have you heard of Moses?" And they go, "Yeah, I've heard of Moses." And I say, "Well, here's the law of Moses." Christians read the law of Moses. We don't just read just Paul or something. We read Moses. I say, "Have you heard of David?" "Yeah, I've heard of David." "Here are the Psalms of David." Christians read the Psalms of David. And I take them through a few of the prophets like Jonah and Job and show them that Christians actually don't just read one person, but we actually read all the prophets, because it's been my experience that Muslims have no idea what the Bible is. And I think the Bible is our strength. It's our trump card, because the Bible is actually all of the prophets. As Christians, we don't follow one prophet. We don't follow one man. We don't follow Paul. We don't follow Peter. We don't follow Isaiah. We don't follow Moses. We're actually led by the Holy Spirit through all of the prophets to the Lord Jesus Christ, and all of the prophets lead us to Jesus. And when you take a Muslim through the table of contents and then contrast that to the Quran, how the Bible is all of the prophets, the Quran is just one man who talks about the prophets. Now, it's pretty easy to show them gently and say, I know you say you believe all the prophets, but really you just believe what Muhammad says about them. I'm the one who actually reads them, right? I read the prophets. If they say they've been changed, you say, that's another topic. That's another topic. We can look at that later on. The point is, I follow and read all of the prophets. You follow one man. And so that's where I like to begin, by clearing the ground and explaining what the Bible is. And I've got other material, which I won't go through now, but chapter 3 of my book takes you through the further steps. And there's a leaflet on my website called What is the Bible? And I give that to a Muslim. And I shift their thinking, from thinking that they follow the prophets, but to help them realize that actually Christians follow the prophets, and they follow one man.
Amen. Amen, brother. That was awesome. And I certainly mean it when I said we are going to take a couple of those chapters and do an entire show together on them, because there is a lot of meat in here that we would like to share with those who will be watching and also witnessing, and hopefully some of our Muslim friends can join us as well. Again, we were showcasing a book called Where to Start with Islam, authored by our brother Samuel Green. We encourage you to go and purchase that book. And also we encourage you to go to his website, engagingwithislam.org, and donate to support his ministry. He does a lot of debates. He authors also. And what else, brother, do you do beside debating and authoring? What other aspects of your ministry people need to be aware of?
Yeah, so I have a training course called Engaging with Islam, and that's a training course where you can train other people in these things. And so each session goes for about 1 hour. There are some notes that you download, you do a little bit of preparation, and then you watch a video. And so there's training. So I really want to be an evangelist myself. That's my calling, to be an evangelist. But I also want to be training other people and helping other people to do this. So it's resources, it's training, and by God's grace, being an example to other Christians on how to do this. So that's my 3 main areas.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here with us. Thank you to our amazing moderators for taking time to join us. Thank you for many of our familiar friends who took the time to be here. Some of you, I know that it is too late already, and others, it's the start of the morning if you're in Asia right now. So we are thankful, of course, for many of you who stand by us, support us, and also believe in what we do. This is the type of interviews that I enjoy doing always, bring in qualified authors, researchers, ministers who know their stuff. And we want to be a resourceful, show, live stream to you. And our brother here also has a website, I should say, that has a lot of resources on it. I encourage you just to go and browse that website called engagingwithislam.org. I think you're going to enjoy the different types of links and other resources that he provides you that will be very helpful to your ministry, of course, to Muslims. I encourage you to check his own training program as well. With that in mind, thank you so much, brother, for taking time to be with us. You and I will be in touch, of course, to have you back soon. I am going to discuss with you about having you also live stream with me when I'm in our studios, our professional studios, soon here also in a couple of weeks this month, in the month of April. So we'll discuss that possibility, see if you're available to do so. And maybe at that time, we'll pick one such topic from your book and we'll talk about it as well. With that in mind, thank you, everyone. This is Al Fadi. It's been a joy to have you here. Hopefully, we'll see you soon this week in another live stream. Until then, God bless you. Take care.